If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The sky over Ridge Hollow turned the color of dirty brass as the sun sank behind the hills. Wind dragged dust across the open ground, whistling through the dry brush. A single trail led west, narrow and uneven, marked by scattered hoof prints and drops of blood that darkened the sand. Clara Monroe stumbled along that trail. Her dress was torn at the shoulder and heavy with sweat. Her bare feet were bleeding, every step pressing grit into the cuts. She kept glancing back toward the town even though she couldn't see it anymore. Only a faint orange glow where the lamp still burned. Her right hand clutched a small revolver, her fingers stiff around it as if letting go would bring everything back. She had fired it once. The sound still echoed in her skull. She could still see the way her husband's eyes widened when the bullet hit. He had fallen backward into the table, knocking over a whiskey bottle. There had been no shouting after that, no breath, no movement, only the steady drip of liquor and blood on the floorboards. She didn't cry, not then, only after she stepped outside and realized she couldn't take it back. The night wind stung her face and carried the smell of gunpowder and dust. Somewhere behind her, dogs began to bark. She moved faster, stumbling through the dry grass. Her mind was blank except for one thought: keep walking. She didn't know where the road went, only that stopping meant being caught. By the time she saw the outline of a wooden structure ahead, her body was shaking from exhaustion. The place looked deserted, an old ranch house with one side of the roof caved in, a barn door half open, and a trough filled with rainwater gone stale. She dropped to her knees beside it and drank until her stomach hurt. When she finally looked up, she saw a horse tied to a fence post not far away. Then came the crunch of boots in the dirt. A man approached slowly from the dark, his long coat moving with the wind. His hat was pulled low, and the lamplight from his porch caught the sharp lines of his face. A man who had seen hard years. A rifle hung loosely at his side, not raised but ready. "You lost?" he asked. His voice was quiet, steady, carrying the wear of someone who didn't expect much from strangers. Clara blinked against the light behind him. Her voice came out dry. "No, I just needed water." He studied her a moment longer, his eyes tracing the blood on her feet, the bruise along her jaw, the way her hands trembled around the revolver still half hidden in her lap. He didn't move closer, just crouched beside the fence and set down a small canteen. "You can rest by the barn," he said. "Ain't much, but it's dry." She hesitated, unsure if it was an order or an invitation. "You don't ask names?" He shook his head. "Names don't fix much out here." She followed him toward the cabin. Inside, the place was plain, rough wood walls, a small stove, and a single bed rolled with blankets. The smell of coffee lingered in the air. She stood near the door, unsure if she was safe or cornered. He poured her a cup of water and set on the table. "Storm's coming," he said. "You can stay till it passes." She nodded, though her body was still tense. "Thank you." He gave a brief nod and went to tend the fire. In the flicker of light, she saw the scars across his forearm, old burns and knife marks, the kind carried by men who'd lived through too many fights. His name, she learned later, was Elias Ward. He had once been a Union scout during the border wars, a man who knew too well what violence left behind. After the war, he'd come south, built this place from scraps, and lived alone ever since. He wasn't hiding from the law, only from memory. As the wind howled against the shutters, Clara sat by the stove, staring into the fire. Every breath she took felt heavy with guilt. The image of her husband's face wouldn't leave her. She didn't know if she wanted forgiveness or just silence. Elias didn't speak again that night. He simply added wood to the fire and sat across from her, eyes fixed on the flames. There was no kindness in his expression, but no judgment either, just the calm understanding of someone who had seen what desperation could make people do. Outside, the storm broke, lightning flashing across the plains. Inside, two strangers shared the same small room, one running for what she'd done, the other from what he could never forget. And though neither of them knew it yet, their paths were about to change everything that still mattered to them both. The storm lasted through the night. Rain beat against the roof in uneven waves, leaking through cracks, and dripping onto the wooden floor. Clara lay on the cot Elias had offered her, staring at the ceiling while thunder rolled far off over the plains. Each rumble sounded like the echo of that gunshot from Ridge Hollow. Every time lightning lit the room, she caught sight of her bare feet, dirty, bandaged with a torn piece of her dress. She felt the sting in her soles and wondered if it was punishment or reminder. Elias sat in a chair by the stove, the firelight casting hard shadows on his face. He hadn't asked her any questions, not about where she came from, not about why her hands trembled every time she heard thunder. That silence was both mercy and torture. She almost wanted him to ask, because saying it out loud might make it real, and she didn't know if she could live with that. By morning, the storm passed. The air outside was cold and wet, the ground soaked. The sky was clear except for a few gray streaks drifting toward the hills. Elias was already outside when Clara stepped onto the porch. He was repairing a broken section of fence, his coat hanging on a post. The man worked with quiet precision, every motion steady, practiced. Clara stood watching for a while before she spoke. "You live here alone?" Elias glanced at her, then back to the fence. "Ain't much reason not to." "No family?" she asked carefully. He shook his head. "Used to. Don't anymore." She didn't press further. The tone in his voice told her enough. It was the kind of loss that people carried for years until it became part of them. After a long pause, she said softly, "Thank you for letting me stay." Elias wiped his hands on his trousers. "You fixin' to head somewhere?" Clara hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe west." "West is dry country," he said. "You'll need a horse, supplies, and a place that doesn't ask questions." "I don't have money," she admitted. He nodded once, as if that didn't surprise him. "Then you can work for it. Roof needs patching. Barn needs cleaning. You help with that, you'll earn your keep." It wasn't kindness, it was fairness. That she could live with. They worked side by side the rest of the day. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and old wood. Clara's arms ached from lifting shingles, but the pain felt good, honest, simple. Elias didn't talk much, but he showed her how to hold the hammer properly, how to brace the boards before nailing them in. When she dropped a tool, he didn't sigh or scold, only picked it up and kept working. At sunset, they sat by the fence watching the last light fade over the fields. A few horses grazed nearby, their shadows long and slow-moving. Clara noticed the small cross set into the ground by the porch, a simple wooden marker, half sunk into the dirt. The letters were faded, but she could still read them. Sarah Ward. She didn't ask, but Elias saw her looking. "My wife," he said quietly. "Fever took her. Long time ago." Clara nodded, her throat tightening. "I'm sorry." He gave a small shrug. "Not your fault." For the first time since she arrived, he looked her in the eyes. "You're running from something too," he said. "That's plain." Her breath caught. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me." She told him everything then. How her husband had found her letters from her brother, accused her of betrayal, and how he'd beaten her until she reached for the gun. She spoke quietly, her voice breaking only once, when she described how he looked at her before he fell. Elias listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stared at the ground for a long moment. "You did what you had to," he said finally. "Some men don't know when to stop. You stopped him." "But I killed him," she said, her voice shaking. "That makes me know better." He shook his head. "There's a difference between ending something and starting it. You don't need to be proud of it, but you don't have to be ashamed either." Clara looked away, blinking hard. His words weren't comforting, but they were honest, and that was more than she'd heard from anyone in years. Later that night, they sat inside by the fire again. The storm had left the air cold, and the crackling of wood was the only sound between them. Clara noticed the rifle leaning against the wall and the old saddle on the floor, both worn, both cared for. "Why did you stay here all this time?" she asked. Elias took a slow breath. "Because sometimes staying put is the only way to live with yourself." She understood that better than she wanted to admit. When she lay down to sleep, the silence outside felt different. Not empty, but still. For the first time since the night of the gunshot, Clara's heartbeat slowed enough for her to rest. And though neither of them said it, both knew their quiet arrangement wouldn't last forever. The law had long memories, and the world out here had a way of finding those who thought they'd escaped it. But for now, there was peace. A small, fragile peace that neither dared disturb. Morning came with the sound of a hammer against wood. Elias was fixing the barn door that had come loose in the wind. The smell of damp hay filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of coffee brewing inside the cabin. Clara stepped out barefoot, her hair tied loosely behind her neck, her face pale but calmer than before. For the first time since arriving, her hands didn't shake when she held the mug Elias had left on the table. She watched him work in silence. His movements were deliberate, patient, as though every nail he drove in was part of a quiet ritual. There was something grounding about it. How a man like him could build something in a world that mostly destroyed. The peace lasted until noon. A distant cloud of dust appeared on the ridge to the east. Elias noticed it first. He stopped what he was doing and narrowed his eyes toward the horizon. The glint of sunlight on metal gave it away, riders. 3, maybe 4 of them. Clara froze when she saw his expression. "Who is it?" "Hard to tell," he said, "but they're heading straight this way." Her stomach tightened. She set the mug down, hands trembling again. "They're looking for me." Elias didn't answer right away. He went inside, opened a chest near the wall, and pulled out an old revolver. It was clean, oiled, and wrapped in a faded cloth. He checked the cylinder, loaded it calmly, and placed it on the table. "You'll stay inside," he said firmly. "Don't open the door unless I tell you. What if they know I'm here?" He looked at her, his tone flat but protective. "Then they'll have to get through me first." He stepped outside and waited on the porch. The riders came closer, their horses slowing as they neared the cabin. The lead man wore a long gray coat and a tin badge on his chest. His horse was a dark bay, and the way he sat in the saddle said he wasn't here for a visit. "Morning," the man called out. "I'm Marshal Cade, out of Ridge Hollow." He stopped a few yards away and tipped his hat. "We're looking for a woman. Name of Clara Monroe. She's wanted for the killing of her husband, Levi Monroe. You seen anyone pass through here?" Elias stood motionless. The only sound was the creak of saddle leather and the wind moving through the grass. "No one's come by," he said evenly. The marshal looked past him toward the cabin. "You live here alone?" "Always have," Elias replied. The two men studied each other in silence. Cade's eyes were sharp and assessing. "Mind if we take a look around?" Elias's jaw tightened. "You already are." The marshal's hand hovered near his holster but didn't move. He gave a thin smile. "If you see her, you let the law know. Word is she's dangerous." Elias's voice stayed calm. "So are a lot of people trying to stay alive." Cade's smile faded. He turned his horse, gave a short whistle, and the men followed him back toward the ridge. Dust rose behind them as they rode away. When the sound of hooves disappeared, Elias went back inside. Clara stood by the window, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "That was him," she said quietly. "He's the one who married us. He knew us both." Elias took a slow breath. "Then he'll be back." Clara leaned against the wall, her voice breaking. "You should have told him. If they think you're hiding me." "Stop," Elias said firmly. "You think I'd hand you over to men like that? You're safe here." Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. "Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me." He looked at her, his voice quieter now. "Maybe I don't need to. I've seen enough people pay for things they didn't deserve." That night, neither of them slept. The fire burned low while the wind scraped against the cabin walls. Clara sat by the window, staring into the dark, unable to shake the image of Cade's eyes, the way he had looked at the house like he already knew she was inside. Elias cleaned his revolver and checked the locks on the doors. He moved with the calm of someone who'd done it many times before, but his thoughts were restless. He remembered the last time he'd seen a marshal's badge up close. Years ago, after a raid that had gone wrong, when he'd been accused of killing civilians he'd never meant to harm. The law hadn't cared about the difference back then either. As dawn approached, Clara finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said I was dangerous." Elias looked up from the fire. "You're not." "How do you know?" "Because I know the look of someone who kills for a reason," he said, "and the look of someone who kills for pleasure. You don't have the second one." She didn't answer, but his words eased something deep in her chest. For the first time, She believed that maybe not everyone saw her as a monster. Before sunrise, Elias showed her the trapdoor beneath the cabin's floorboards. Built this back when soldiers came through the valley. If Cade returns, you go down there. Stay quiet. Don't come out until I call for you. Clara crouched to look at the small space. Dark, narrow, filled with old supplies and dust. You've had a hide before, she said softly. He nodded. Everyone has, one way or another. The morning light crept through the cracks in the shutters, faint but steady. The land outside was calm again, yet both of them knew it was only temporary. The law didn't forget, and guilt didn't fade just because the rain stopped. Still, in that fragile hour before the sun rose, Clara realized something she hadn't dared to hope for in a long time. She trusted him. Not because he promised safety, but because he didn't pretend the danger wasn't real. And for Elias, the sight of her sitting quietly by the fire made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. A reason to protect. A reason to stay. Neither of them said it, but both understood. The storm outside had passed, yet the real one was only beginning. 3 days passed after Marshal Cade's visit, and the valley stayed quiet. The air was dry again, the sky a hard blue without a trace of cloud. But peace in that kind of land never lasted long. Elias could feel it, the same way a man feels the tremor of a storm before it breaks. Every morning he rode out to check the ridge. Every evening he came back slower, more alert, more certain that eyes were watching from somewhere beyond the hills. Inside the cabin, Clara tried to keep busy. She cleaned the place, cooked, and repaired torn shirts just to keep her hands moving. The silence between them had grown thicker, not out of mistrust, but from the weight of what both already knew. Cade would return, and when he did, there would be no room for hesitation. One evening, as the sun sank red across the horizon, Clara found Elias sitting by the barn sharpening his knife. The steady sound of metal against stone carried through the still air. She hesitated before walking closer. You think they'll come soon? She asked. He nodded slightly. Cade's the kind that doesn't stop until he finds what he's after. Might be tonight, might be a week, but he'll come. Clara folded her arms, voice tight. Then I should go. The longer I stay, the more danger I bring you. Elias looked up at her. You leave alone. They'll catch you before you hit the next town. You stay, we might have a chance. She stepped closer, her tone sharpening. You don't owe me anything, Elias. You've already done more than anyone else ever would. He met her eyes with a steadiness that quieted her. Maybe, but I'm not letting another person die because the law got it wrong. His words hung heavy between them. Clara didn't ask what he meant, but she saw it in his face, the shadow of something from his past that still lived in him. Later that night, when the wind rose, she found him staring out the window with the rifle across his lap. What happened back then? She asked softly. Before you came here. Elias didn't look at her. I was a scout during the border wars. Got sent with a unit to clear out a raider camp. Turned out it wasn't raiders, it was families. The order came from above, but the blame fell on the men who followed it. I walked away, and I've been walking ever since. Clara swallowed hard. The truth explained more than she expected. The quiet in him, the distance, the way he spoke like every word cost him something. You've been hiding ever since, she said. He nodded. Until you showed up. Before she could respond, a faint sound cut through the wind. Hooves. Distant, steady, approaching fast. Elias set the rifle down, extinguished the lantern, and moved to the door. Get below, he whispered. Clara froze. Elias. Now. His tone was firm but calm, the kind that didn't invite argument. She lifted the floorboard and climbed into the cellar, her breath quick and uneven. The small trapdoor closed above her, and the cabin fell into silence. Outside, the hoofbeats drew closer. Through the cracks in the wood, Clara could hear voices, men dismounting, boots crunching on gravel. Cade's voice came first, cold and sure. Ward, we're not here to talk this time. Step outside. Elias opened the door slowly, his figure framed by the lamplight. Evening, Marshal. You had your chance to tell the truth, Cade said. We track her prints right to your fence line. You're harboring a fugitive, and that makes you guilty by choice. Elias stepped off the porch, keeping his hands visible. She's not here. Cade's eyes flicked toward the cabin. You wouldn't mind if we checked. I would, Elias said flatly. This is my land. One of Cade's men took a step toward the barn. Elias shifted his stance, his hand resting near his holster. Don't, he said quietly. The man stopped. Cade's voice hardened. You'd kill a marshal for her? Elias's jaw tightened. I've done worse for less. For a long moment, neither man moved. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the yard. Cade studied him, searching for weakness, but all he found was resolve. Finally, he spat into the dirt. You always were good at protecting the wrong people, Ward. That's why you ended up out here. Elias said nothing. Cade turned his horse, motioning for his men to follow. We'll be back tomorrow. And next time, it won't be a talk. The riders disappeared into the dark. Elias waited until the sound faded completely before he went inside and lifted the floorboard. Clara climbed out, her face pale. They'll kill you for this, she said. Maybe, he answered, setting the rifle on the table. But not tonight. She moved closer, her voice trembling. You can still leave. Ride north before they come back. They want me, not you. Elias looked at her, tired but calm. I left once before. Didn't fix a thing. I'm done running. For a moment, neither spoke. The firelight flickered against the walls, casting them both in soft, uneven light. Clara reached out and touched his arm, not out of fear this time, but gratitude. You shouldn't have to pay for what I did. He met her gaze. We both did what we had to. That's all. Outside, thunder rolled far off in the mountains, though the sky was still clear. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Tomorrow would bring a fight neither of them wanted, but both had already accepted. Elias sat back in his chair, cleaning the rifle with slow, steady hands. Clara stood behind him, her shadow long against the wall. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It carried understanding, trust, and something deeper neither dared to name. And as the night deepened, Clara realized that the man who had once hidden from the world was now standing between her and everything chasing her. It wasn't mercy. It was choice. And for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her. The next morning came gray and windless. The air was heavy with the smell of dust, and the sky hung low, flat, and colorless. Elias had been awake long before sunrise. He saddled the horses quietly, checked the rifle twice, and walked the fence line one last time. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a man making peace with the day before it began. Inside the cabin, Clara packed the little they owned. A few rations, a canteen, the revolver she once swore she'd never touch again. Her fingers shook when she fastened the holster around her waist. Every sound seemed louder that morning. The creak of the floorboards, the whistle of wind through the cracks, her own heartbeat. When she stepped outside, Elias was waiting by the porch. We'll ride north, he said. Cut through the canyons. Cade won't risk horses in there. Clara nodded, though doubt clouded her face. And if they find us? Then we ended our way. For a while, they rode in silence. The open land stretched around them, dry grass swaying in the faint wind, scattered rocks, the long shadow of the mountains in the west. The world felt larger than it had before, almost endless, but Clara couldn't escape the feeling that every mile brought them closer to something final. They stopped near the edge of a ravine, the air sharp and dry. From that high ground, Elias spotted movement far to the south, a glint of sunlight reflecting off metal. Riders again, Cade and his men. They were coming faster this time. Elias turned to her, his voice calm but firm. You ride ahead. There's a pass beyond the ridge. It'll take you to the next valley. Keep going until you hit the river. I'm not leaving you, Clara said, her breath quickening. You have to, he said. They want you, not me. I'll draw them off. She shook her head, her voice breaking. You can't fight them alone. Elias's eyes met hers, steady, quiet, and resolved. I'm not fighting them, just buying you time. For a moment, Clara froze, torn between fear and something deeper, something she hadn't wanted to name since the night she arrived. He was the first man who had ever seen her as something other than property, burden, or mistake. The idea of losing him felt worse than the gallows. Elias, please, she whispered. He reached into his coat and pressed something into her hand, his old wedding ring, worn and smooth. If you make it out, he said, "throw it in the river. Maybe both of us can rest." Clara's breath caught, but before she could answer, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Dust rose behind them like smoke. Elias grabbed his rifle and slapped her horse's flank. "Go!" Her horse lunged forward. She looked back once and saw him standing there on the ridge, coat whipping in the wind, rifle raised. The riders came into view, Cade leading them, his badge glinting under the gray sky. Gunfire cracked through the air. The echo rolled across the canyon walls. Clara ducked low and rode hard, the world blurring past her. The sound of shots faded behind her, replaced by the pounding of her horse's hooves and the rush of her breath. She didn't know how far she rode before the silence came again, only that it felt wrong. Too sudden, too final. When she finally stopped, she turned her horse toward the ridge. The land was quiet. No riders, no dust, no movement. Just the long emptiness of the plains. She waited, hoping to see a figure in the distance, but none appeared. Her hands trembled around the reins. For the first time since she'd pulled that trigger back in Ridge Hollow, she cried. Not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd given her. One man's choice to trade his life for her chance at another. Hours passed before she reached the river. The water was shallow and slow, glinting in the sunlight. Clara dismounted, walked to the edge, and opened her hand. The ring gleamed in her palm, still warm from her skin. She looked at it for a long time before letting it fall. The current carried it away, turning it over and over until it vanished. When she looked up, the horizon stretched wide and quiet. The sky had cleared, and for the first time in weeks, the air smelled clean. She turned north, following the water's edge. Each step was heavy but certain. Days later, she reached a small trading post near the border. No one there knew her name, as she didn't offer it. She traded her horse for a place to sleep, took work cleaning stables, and began the slow process of living without looking over her shoulder. Weeks turned into months. The nightmares faded. Her hands grew steady again. But every evening, when the sun dipped low and the light hit the hills just right, she would stop whatever she was doing and look toward the south, the direction of that cabin, that ridge, that man who had chosen to stand his ground for her. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the ending he gave her wasn't built on tragedy, but on faith, the quiet kind that doesn't need words. Elias Ward was gone, but his choice had turned her curse into a second chance. And Clara Monroe, once a fugitive, finally learned what freedom truly felt like. For the first time since that desperate night, she smiled. Not out of joy, but out of peace. It was over. And this time, it would stay that way.